In this video, we're going to explain to you how to install and correctly set up Shimano's Di2 Groupset, so you can enjoy the benefits of electronic shifting. Let's go. So to begin with, you're going to need to make sure that you've got a frame that is actually Di2 compatible. Well, and if you haven't, you're probably going to have to return your brand new Groupset, or use it as a good excuse to upgrade your frame to a Di2 compatible one. If you're unsure whether your frame's Di2 compatible, it's worth just checking with your manufacturer to see what the specifications are. Now, as with all group sets, it's important to check that what you've ordered is actually correct for your bike. Di2 group sets have a selection of different junction box options, as well as the cable lengths and the various fixtures and fittings, so make sure you've got the correct parts first. Now, if you're not starting from scratch like we are today, you will have a few additional components to remove first, just to make life a little bit easier. Now, you're also only going to need fairly basic tools which you're likely to have at home. A selection of Allen keys, the tools for your specific bottom bracket type, and also the small Di2 tool that will have came with your group set. Now, it's not a crucial tool to use, but it will make life that little bit easier. Now that we've covered some of the compatibility variations, let's make a start and install some of the first components. Now, using the bike like we are today, the Canyon R.A.D, it has internal cable routing. So one of our first jobs is to take the longest cable from our Groupset box and install this all the way from the head tube, down the down tube towards the bottom bracket area. Once we've got this cable in place, we can then look to reinsert the forks and assemble the handlebars back on the bike. So taking the first end of the cable, we're going to insert this through the hole in the frame and guide it all the way through and down the down tube towards the bottom bracket area. Now, if, like me, you've come to a bit of a stop, it can sometimes be easier to move the bike and angle the frame like this and have gravity help you out. This way, you can guide it all the way down and out the bottom bracket, just like that. Now we've got the cable installed all the way through the down tube, you can put this back down and then reassemble the forks into the bike and attach the handlebars. Now, having installed the cable that runs all the way through the down tube and reinstalled the forks and the handlebars, we can now look to fit the first shifter. To do this, we're going to have to roll the hood cover back. That will give us good access to the bolt and the shifter clamp, and then we can just guide it on to the bottom of the handlebars like so. Carefully position it up the handlebars to a position that you'd be happy with. Once you've got that there, we can take our 5mm Allen key and just do this bolt clamp up to hold that in place like so. Having installed the shifters onto the handlebars, our next stage of the process is to take two cables of equal length from the Groupset box and also the relevant junction box for your bike. Now, these cables are one is going to run from the shifter across centrally where the junction box will sit on this bike underneath the stem like so. So to plug the cable into the shifter, we can pull the hood cover back like so, and that gains us access to this small area here where we can take the end of our cable, guide that into the 1-3 port, and it's important to give that a firm click into place. Now, it can feel like it's clipped into place, but just give it a good firm push and you should get a good positive engagement. So now that we've got both shifter cables connected, we can move on to the next step of installing the junction box. Now, to connect it up, we first need to connect the cable from the down tube that we installed earlier. This cable will connect into the central port on the junction box like so. Now, it's important to connect these cables from the shifters to the relevant port on that side of the bike, like that. And then the next one connects onto the other port that was remaining free. So there you have it, those are connected correctly. And for now, the junction box will just have to hang underneath the handlebars because we're not going to fit the rest of the face plates that would hold it in place at the moment. With those steps completed, that's all we need to do at the front of the bike at this moment in time. Here we can move on down towards the bottom bracket area and install the relevant junction box down there. Now, working down the bottom bracket area, we can actually get quite a lot of the components installed here with the cables. We can install the small junction box that sits down here. That will enable us to install the cable that runs up to the front derailleur, also the cable that runs towards the back for the rear derailleur, and also on this bike, the battery is actually situated at the bottom of the down tube, so we can go ahead and install that as well. There's quite a lot of parts to fit down here. Firstly, let's install this junction box in the bottom bracket. This is what's going to connect the front derailleur cable, the rear derailleur cable, the battery, and then connect to this cable which is run all the way up to the front of the bike. And would you believe it doesn't actually matter which way round you plug the cables into this. So let's plug the junction box into the one cable we have got installed, like so. Now, once we've got that plugged in, we can look to install the rest of the cables, starting with the front mech. The front derailleur cable is usually the shortest cable in your Groupset box, so it's important to check you've got the right one. Now on this Canyon R.A.D you have to remove the front derailleur plate to enable you to gain access to the hole to guide this cable down. Now it's quite simply just a case, insert the cable through here and allow gravity to guide this down through to the bottom bracket area, like so, out of the hole, and then we can plug this straight into our junction box as we did with the first cable. Moving on to the rear derailleur cable. This cable is easiest to guide through from the back of the bike and guide it through there, carefully guide it through until it makes an appearance down at the bottom bracket. Here we can guide it down through where the junction box is, making sure not to pull it too far through, and then we can just plug that into the junction box, the same as we've done for the rest of the cables. So now that we've got the junction box installed, the front of the bike connected, the front derailleur cable connected, and the rear derailleur cable connected, we need to add some power. Now this is the Shimano Di2 battery, and on this bike it actually sits inside the frame on the down tube here. However, there are some bikes that will install the battery into the seat post like that, and if that's the case, you just need to have a slightly longer cable that will run all the way down the seat tube and down towards the junction box. Now, some frame manufacturers will supply a bracket specific to that bike to hold the battery in place. This Canyon supplies a bracket like this, which carefully sits inside and holds the battery securely. Now that we've got our specific bracket, we can put that onto the battery like so, guide that on, and then with the junction box out of the way, we can guide this into the frame and up into where it needs to sit, remembering to keep the cable pointing down inside the frame. With the battery in the frame, we can now move on to aligning the holes within the frame and fit in the remainder of the clamp on the outside to hold it in place. Now we've got the battery correctly installed within the frame, we can take the last remaining cable and plug this into the junction box like so. Now, like that. Now, an important point to note is it's often best to wrap a small piece of bubble wrap or foam around that junction box as you insert it to the inside of the frame. That will help stop any rattling that might become annoying over time with bumpy roads. So now that we've successfully completed those steps, we can move on to the next part of the job, which is installing the bottom bracket and the cranks too. Now, if you're unsure of these, we've got plenty of videos explaining both press fit and threaded bottom bracket types, as well as a variety of different crank styles. So to save us some time, I'm going to go ahead and use a bit of GCN magic. Whoa, that was bloody quick. Now we've got that step out of the way, we can go ahead and fit the front and rear derailleurs. Let's make a start with the front derailleur. You're going to need the bolt and the small curved washer to sit the correct side of the hanger here, and then we can go ahead, line those up, doing this up by hand, making sure that this curved washer matches up with the derailleur hanger. Now while it's still hand tight, it's going to enable us the bit of movement to line up both the height to ensure that the cage clears the teeth and is not going to interfere with that, and also viewing from the back of the bike the angle that the derailleur is sitting at to make sure it's parallel with the chain rings. Once we've got this in place and we're happy that it's not going to interfere, we can take our 5mm Allen key and tighten that up correctly in place. With the front derailleur correctly attached, we've got two remaining jobs. Firstly, we can go in and now connect the front derailleur cable like so, plug that in nicely. And secondly, one part that many people overlook is the small little support screw which is hidden inside the front derailleur. All we need to do with this is screw it in until it meets the face of the derailleur hanger, and that'll be that set. Having installed the front derailleur correctly, we can now move to the rear of the bike and install the rear derailleur. It's quite a simple process, but it's important to note as we're winding it on, like so, we just line correctly up the small stops for the B-limit screw, and we match those up carefully with the stops relevant on the derailleur hanger. So we've got this in place, can do that up nice and tight. Then we can just take the same process, clip the cable securely into the derailleur. That will enable us to move on to the next step, fitting the wheels and installing the chain. Now that you've got everything installed and connected on your bike, providing you've done it correctly, we can look to shift into the largest sprocket at the back and smallest chainring at the front. Now in this gear, we're going to be able to set the low limit position screw on the front derailleur. This is actually set electronically using an adjusted setting that we're going to go in and show now. Moving to the front of the bike, we can gain access to the junction box. Now to enable adjustment mode, we're going to have to press and hold the button on the junction box for between 3 and 5 seconds. Now by doing this, the red LED will illuminate, indicating that adjustment mode is active. So to enable us to set the limit screw for the lower setting on the derailleur, we can now use these shifters to make small little micro adjustments at the front, like so, to ensure that the inner face of the chain isn't contacting the inner face of the front derailleur. Now, once we've got that set correctly, like it is here, that'll ensure there's no rubbing, and we can go ahead, press and hold this for another 5 seconds, and that's out of adjustment mode, and those settings have been saved. Having set the front derailleur's low position, we can now move to setting the high position. This is adjusted mechanically using a 2mm Allen key, and the first step we're going to need to do is shift into the big chainring and smallest sprocket at the back. Having shifted into the correct gear, we can take our 2mm Allen key and then look to set the high limit screw correctly. This will enable us to make sure that the outer face of the chain is not contacting the outer face of the derailleur cage. We'll probably want to aim for about 0.5 mm gap. Just make sure it's not touching, causing any annoying rubbing. Having correctly set the front derailleur, we can now move to the rear and set the limit screws for that. Now, seeing as we're already in the smallest sprocket on the cassette, we might as well go ahead and set the high limit screw now. The high limit screw is adjusted here and follows the very same principle as mechanical derailleurs would. It's a case of adjusting it as so to ensure that the top pulley wheel sits perfectly in line with the smallest sprocket. Having set the high limit screw correctly, we can shift all the way up into the largest sprocket and then set the low limit screw using the exact same principles. With the low limit screw set correctly, it actually leaves us in the correct gear to set the B limit screw. This is a part often overlooked by people, but adjusting this B limit screw here can just reduce or increase the gap between the teeth on the largest sprocket and the top pulley wheel. Now it's important to aim for about 3 or 4 millimeters just to ensure that the mech is nice and close for crisp and precise shifting every time. Our final step to ensuring we've got our gears set up correctly is just to check we've got the indexing set correctly on the rear derailleur. Now, if when shifting through the gears to set the low and high limit screws, you found the indexing to be just not quite right, we can go ahead and adjust this now. It's a very simple process and similar to what we did for the front derailleur. We need to use the front junction box, press and hold the button to put the system into the adjustment mode, and then most importantly of all, use the right hand shifter to make any adjustments to the indexing on the rear derailleur. Using the small little clicks, it will make a small adjustment. Once we're happy that the gears are indexed correctly, press and hold the button to exit and save those adjustments. So there you have it, Shimano's Di2 gear system correctly installed and set up. Now at this point you would probably move on to setting up the brakes. It will vary depending on whether you've got rim brakes or disc brakes, but either way round we've got videos explaining the process involved with that. Once the brakes are installed, it's just a case of smartening up all of the cabling at the front, retaping the bars, and then giving the entire system a quick check over to make sure you're happy everything's operating as it should. Now would be a great time to check out Shimano's eTube app or computer program. That will enable you to change all sorts of shifting options and settings and also update any relevant firmware. Now, I really hope you've enjoyed this video, and as usual, if you have, make sure to let us know in the comments section down below, or let us know any future maintenance videos you'd like to see. Give us a big thumbs up, and thanks for watching.